Hello, my name is Elias. I'm 38. I repair appliances. Washers, dryers, refrigerators, the things people don't think about until they break and their whole world grinds to a halt. It's a quiet job. Most of my day is spent listening to the hum of machines, the rattle of a loose belt, the gurgle of a blocked drain. I listen to machines because they don't lie. Their problems are straightforward. There's a logic to them. A broken part can be replaced. A clogged line can be cleared. It's satisfying, that directness. You find the problem, you fix it, you move on. I live in a small house on the edge of town, the kind of place where the suburbs start to thin out and you can almost smell the fields on a damp morning. It was my parents' house. They're gone now. I never got around to leaving. It's a 2-bedroom brick ranch, solid and unassuming, with a garage that's more workshop than a place for a car. My truck, a gray Ford that's seen better days but runs like a dream, always sits in the driveway. The paint is faded on the passenger side where the sun hits it in the afternoon. Inside, the house is clean but sparse. I have the things I need: a good bed, a comfortable chair, a television I rarely turn on, and shelves of books I've read so many times the spines are soft as cloth. It's a life measured in routine. Coffee at 6, on the road by 7:30, home by 5, dinner, a book, then sleep. It's not a bad life, it's just quiet. The silence in the house can be heavy sometimes, a physical weight in the air. My work takes me all over the county, into homes of every shape and size. I see people at their most vulnerable, when a piece of their carefully constructed domestic world has failed. They let me into their kitchens and laundry rooms, these private spaces where life happens. I see the crayon marks on the walls, the stacks of mail on the counter, the photos stuck to the refrigerator with cartoon magnets. I'm a temporary ghost in their lives. I come in, I fix the problem, and I disappear. They're usually grateful. Sometimes they're flustered, apologetic about the mess, as if I'm there to judge the state of their floors. I never am. I'm just there for the machine. I've always been good at keeping a professional distance, at being polite but forgettable. It's easier that way, less complicated. I've known the Henderson family for a few years, but not well. I met their son, Jamal, through a community mentoring program. He was a teenager then, smart and restless, with a talent for taking things apart but not always putting them back together. I showed him a few things about engines, about how to diagnose a problem by sound and feel. We worked on his first car together, an old Civic that sputtered and coughed. He's in college now, studying engineering. He calls me every once in a while, asks for advice, or just checks in. He's a good kid. I've met his father, Richard, once or twice. He's a lawyer or something in finance, always dressed in a crisp suit, with a firm, quick handshake that feels more like a dismissal than a greeting. He has a way of looking at you that makes you feel like you're taking up his valuable time. I had never met Jamal's mother. In my mind, she was just a vague shape, a part of the background of their big, 2-story house in the nice part of town, the part with the manicured lawns and the oak trees that form a canopy over the street. I pictured her as someone like Richard, polished and distant. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday. It was Jamal. His voice was rushed, a little strained. "Elias? Hey man. Sorry to bother you at work. Listen, our washing machine is freaking out. It's making this horrible grinding noise and my mom is convinced it's about to explode. You think you could swing by?" "Sure, Jamal. No problem," I said, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "I've got one stop ahead of you, but I can be there this afternoon. Around 3? "Yeah, man, that'd be perfect. Thanks. You're a lifesaver." He paused. "My mom will be there. Her name's Lena." And that was it. Just a name. Lena. It sounded soft. It didn't match the hard, glossy picture I had in my head of the woman married to Richard. I pulled up to the house a few minutes before 3. It was just as I remembered it. A big brick colonial with white columns and perfectly sculpted hedges. It looked like a picture from a magazine, a little too perfect, a little sterile. I grabbed my toolbox from the back of the truck and walked up the stone path to the front door. The air was still and warm. I could hear the faint sound of a lawnmower from a few houses down. Everything was quiet, orderly. I rang the doorbell, and for a moment, nothing happened. I could hear faint, frantic sounds from inside. Then the door opened, and there she was, Lena. She was not what I expected. She was beautiful, yes, with high cheekbones and large dark eyes, but it was a fragile kind of beauty. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, with loose strands framing her face. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt and yoga pants, and her feet were bare. She looked tired. It wasn't just a lack of sleep, it was a deeper exhaustion, a weariness that seemed to settle in the slight slump of her shoulders and the fine lines around her eyes. Those eyes. They were the first thing I really saw. They were expressive and deep, but they held a profound sadness, a kind of permanent storm cloud that no amount of sunshine could burn away. She gave me a small, nervous smile. "You must be Elias. Jamal talks about you all the time." Her voice was lower than I expected, and a little husky. "That's me," I said, returning the smile as best I could. "Here to look at your washer." "Oh, thank God." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. "Please, come in. It's in the laundry room, just off the kitchen. It sounds like a plane is trying to take off in there." I stepped inside. The house was immaculate. The floors shone. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something floral. But it felt cold, like a museum. There were no stray papers, no shoes by the door, no sign of the comfortable chaos of a life being lived. It felt like a stage set, waiting for the actors to arrive. She led me through a pristine kitchen with white marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they had never been used. The laundry room was at the back. It was a small, windowless space, and the washing machine was shaking and groaning, just as she'd described. "See?" she said, standing in the doorway, wringing her hands slightly. "It started this morning. I thought it was going to walk right out of the room." "I'll take a look," I said, setting my toolbox down. I moved past her into the small room. The space was tight, and for a brief second, my arm brushed against hers. It was an accident, a simple consequence of a small space, but I felt a jolt, like a spark of static electricity. She pulled back quickly, her eyes wide for a moment, as if she'd felt it too. I didn't look at her. I just focused on the machine, turning the dial to off. The horrible noise shuddered to a stop. The silence that followed was deafening. I knelt and pulled the machine away from the wall, the vinyl floor groaning under its weight. Lena stayed in the doorway watching me. I could feel her eyes on my back as I worked, a steady, quiet pressure. I didn't mind. It was different from the way most clients watch, with impatience or suspicion. Her gaze felt curious. Attentive. "So, you're the famous Elias," she said after a few minutes of silence, her voice soft. I grunted as I loosened a bolt on the back panel. "I don't know about famous. Jamal thinks you can fix anything. He says you have magic hands." I couldn't help but smile a little at that. Just years of practice. No magic involved. I got the panel off and shone my flashlight inside, peering into the guts of the machine. I saw the problem almost immediately. The drive belt was shredded, and a loose bearing in the drum was the likely culprit for the noise. It was a common issue, an easy fix. "Found it," I said, sitting back on my heels. "The main bearing is shot. It shredded the belt. I have a new belt in the truck, but I'll have to order the bearing. Should be here in a day or two." "Oh." The disappointment in her voice was palpable. It seemed like more than just the inconvenience of a broken washer. It was as if she'd been counting on this small thing being resolved, and the delay was one more weight added to an already heavy load. "I can put the new belt on for now," I offered, looking up at her. Our eyes met, and for the first time I held her gaze. The sadness in them was overwhelming. It was like looking into a deep well. I had the sudden, inexplicable urge to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but I had no idea what. I was just the repairman, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I focused on the job. "It'll still be noisy because of the bearing, but it should work for a day or two if you need to do a load. I can come back and replace the bearing as soon as the part comes in." Her expression softened. A genuine, grateful smile touched her lips, and for a second, the clouds in her eyes seemed to part. "Really? You would do that?" "It's no trouble," I said, my voice coming out a little rougher than I intended. I stood up and headed for the door. "I'll just go grab the belt from my truck." When I came back, she was standing by the kitchen counter holding a glass of water. She held it out to me. "Here. You must be thirsty." "Thank you," I said, taking it. Our fingers brushed again, a fleeting, feather-light touch. This time, neither of us pulled away so quickly. I took a long drink of the cold water, the silence stretching between us. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was something else. It was a stillness, a shared pause in the day. I fixed the belt, and she watched me the whole time. We didn't talk much more. I explained what I was doing, and she nodded, asking a simple question here and there. When I was done, I pushed the machine back into place and ran a quick test cycle. It was still loud, that grinding hum of the bad bearing, but it was working. "I'll call you as soon as the part arrives," I said, packing my tools. "Thank you, Elias," she said, walking me to the door. "Really, thank you." "It's my job," I said, shrugging. "No, I mean it." She looked me straight in the eye again. "You were very kind." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded and walked back to my truck, her gaze following me all the way down the driveway. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. She was still standing in the open doorway, a solitary figure in that big, empty-looking house. I thought about her for the rest of the day. I thought about the sadness in her eyes, and the cold, perfect silence of her home. And I thought about that strange, quiet connection, a silent conversation that seemed to happen in the spaces between our words. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a very long time, and it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The bearing arrived 2 days later. I called the house, and she answered on the first ring, her voice brightening when she heard it was me. We arranged for me to come by the next morning. I told myself it was just another job, a simple repair. But I couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in my chest, a feeling that was entirely unprofessional and entirely new. When I arrived, she was waiting. This time she was dressed in jeans and a simple white t-shirt. She had a little makeup on and she'd done something with her hair. She looked less tired, more present. She smiled when she opened the door, a real smile that reached her eyes and made them shine. "You're here," she said, as if she'd been worried I wouldn't come. "Promised I would be," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. The repair itself was quick. I was efficient, my hands moving with the familiar confidence of my trade. I swapped out the old worn-out bearing for the new one, fitted the belt, and closed everything up. Lena leaned against the doorframe of the laundry room, watching me work. She didn't hover. She just observed, a quiet presence in the room. "What's it like?" she asked suddenly, her voice pulling me from my concentration. I looked up from tightening the last screw. "What's what like?" "Your job. Being able to just fix things, to see a problem and know exactly how to make it right." I paused, considering her question. No one had ever asked me that before. To most people, my job was just a dirty, functional necessity. "It's good," I said slowly. "It's definite. Things either work or they don't. There's no gray area. I like that." She nodded, a wistful look on her face. "No gray area," she repeated softly, more to herself than to me. "That must be nice." I finished the job and started the machine. It purred to life, the drum turning with a smooth, quiet whir. The violent grinding was gone. The silence was replaced by a gentle, rhythmic hum. We both stood there for a moment, just listening to the sound of something working the way it was supposed to. "There," I said, feeling a familiar surge of satisfaction. "Good as new." She clapped her hands together lightly, a childlike gesture of delight. "It's perfect. Oh, Elias, that's wonderful. Thank you." She looked so genuinely happy, so relieved, that I felt my own spirits lift. It was just a washing machine, but in that moment, it felt like more. It felt like I had brought a small piece of order back into her world. She insisted on making me a cup of coffee. I tried to refuse, saying I had another call to get to, but she was gently persistent. "Please," she said. "It's the least I can do." So I found myself sitting at her huge polished kitchen island, a place that felt far too grand for me, while she moved around the gleaming kitchen, making coffee. She seemed more at ease today, her movements less hesitant. We talked as she worked. I asked about Jamal, and her face lit up as she told me about his classes, about how proud she was of him. I told her a little about my own quiet life, about my house and my work. The conversation was easy, unforced. It felt normal. As I was getting ready to leave, she handed me the payment. Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she passed me the check. I was wondering, she started, then stopped, biting her lower lip. She looked down at the floor, then back up at me, her gaze steady. My dishwasher has been making a funny noise lately, sort of a clunking sound. Do you think you could take a look at it sometime? I knew, in that instant, that there was nothing wrong with her dishwasher. I'm not sure how I knew, but I did. It was in the way she asked, the slight hesitation in her voice, the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. It was a pretext, an excuse to see me again. A part of me, the professional, logical part, knew I should make an excuse, tell her to call the office and schedule an appointment. But another part of me, a part I hadn't heard from in a long time, didn't want to. I wanted to see her again too. Sure, I heard myself say. I can stop by Friday morning, if that works for you. Her relief was a visible thing, a wave that washed over her face, smoothing out the lines of tension. Friday would be perfect, she said, her voice bright. Thank you, Elias. Driving away from her house for the second time, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and excitement. I was crossing a line. I knew it. This was no longer just a job. I was stepping into the gray area I claimed to dislike, a place where things were not simple, not definite. But as I thought of her smile, of the light that had briefly returned to her sad eyes, I found that I didn't care. I wanted to know what was in that gray area. I wanted to know more about Lena Henderson. Friday came, and I found myself at her door again. The house was just as quiet, just as pristine. She let me in, and we went through the now familiar routine. I knelt by the dishwasher, and she stood nearby, watching. I ran it through a cycle. It hummed along perfectly. There was no clunking sound, not even a whisper of one. I worked on it for a while anyway, pulling out the racks, checking the spray arms, tapping things with the handle of my screwdriver. I was performing a role, and so was she. We were two actors in a quiet play that only we understood. After about 20 minutes, I sat back on my heels and looked up at her. I can't find anything wrong with it, I said, my voice neutral. It seems to be running fine. She didn't feign surprise. She just gave a small, sheepish nod. A faint blush crept up her neck. Oh, well, that's good, I guess. It must have just been a temporary thing. Her eyes flickered away from mine. The silence in the kitchen was thick with everything we weren't saying. Maybe, I said. I started packing up my tools, the metallic clink of wrenches and pliers echoing in the quiet room. Would you, she began, her voice barely a whisper. Would you like some more coffee? And that became our ritual. I would come to her house under the guise of a repair. The dryer that wasn't heating properly, a loose connection I fixed in 5 minutes. The garbage disposal that was humming, a wooden spoon handle, easily removed. The refrigerator that was making a weird buzzing noise. The ice maker, which I turned off and on again. Each visit was a carefully constructed excuse, and each time, the repair would be followed by coffee at her kitchen island. We talked. At first, it was about simple things. Books we'd read, movies we'd seen, the changing seasons. But slowly, carefully, she began to open up. She never spoke directly about her husband, Richard, but his presence was a constant, oppressive ghost in her stories. She would talk about a party they'd attended, and I could hear the loneliness in her description of standing alone in a crowded room. She would mention a trip they had taken, and I could sense the emptiness of walking on a beautiful beach by herself. She was painting a portrait of her life, and the most important figure in it was missing, leaving behind a stark, colorless void. She told me about her dreams. Before she was married, she had wanted to be a landscape photographer. She described, with a passion that made her whole face come alive, the way light fell across a mountain range at dawn, the intricate patterns of frost on a window pane. She had a portfolio, she said, tucked away in a closet somewhere, filled with pictures she hadn't looked at in years. Richard, he thought it was a nice hobby, she said one afternoon, swirling the coffee in her mug. But not a serious pursuit. Not for the wife of a man in his position. The words were delivered without bitterness, just a flat, resigned statement of fact. I became her listener. I didn't offer advice. I didn't pass judgment. I just sat there, at her kitchen island, and listened. I created a space for her to put all the words she had been holding inside for years. I could see the effect it was having on her. With each visit, she seemed a little lighter. The permanent storm clouds in her eyes began to recede, replaced by moments of genuine laughter and flashes of the passionate woman she used to be. For my part, I found myself changing too. The heavy silence in my own house didn't feel so oppressive anymore. It was filled with the memory of her voice, with the anticipation of our next meeting. I was breaking all my rules. I was getting involved. I was letting someone into the quiet, orderly world I had built for myself, and it was terrifying, and it was wonderful. One rainy afternoon, I was at her house fixing a supposedly leaking faucet under the kitchen sink. It was another phantom problem. As I lay on my back in the cramped space, she sat on the floor nearby, her back against the cabinets. The rain drummed a soft, steady rhythm on the roof. "You know," she said, her voice soft and contemplative, "Jamal worries about you." I paused, my wrench slipping on a fitting. "About me? Why?" "He says you're alone too much. He thinks about you in that big, quiet house all by yourself." I didn't know what to say. The idea that someone worried about me was a foreign concept. I had been on my own for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be a presence in someone else's thoughts. "I'm fine," I said, my voice muffled by the cabinet. "I like the quiet." "Do you?" she asked gently. "Or are you just used to it?" Her question hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stopped working and just lay there, on the cold floor, the smell of lemon polish and damp earth filling my senses. Was I just used to it? Had I mistaken resignation for contentment? I had built my life around the idea that it was easier to be alone, that avoiding complication was the same as finding peace. But sitting here, in this quiet kitchen, listening to the rain and the sound of her breathing, I felt a profound sense of connection that made my solitary existence feel suddenly, painfully empty. I slid out from under the sink and sat up, wiping my hands on a rag. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. She looked small and vulnerable, but her gaze was direct, unwavering. "I don't know," I admitted, the words tasting strange in my mouth. It was the most honest thing I had said to anyone in years. She gave me a small, sad smile. "Me neither," she whispered. That was the day something shifted. The pretense of the repairs began to fall away, leaving behind the raw, unspoken truth of our connection. We both knew why I was there. It wasn't for the appliances anymore. It was for these moments of shared silence, of quiet understanding. We were two lonely people who had found a small, safe harbor in each other's company. But harbors are not meant to be permanent homes. They are places you stay before you face the storm. And I could feel the storm gathering on the horizon. The turning point came on a cool evening in early autumn. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the edges of the town in strokes of gold and crimson. I had gotten a call from her that afternoon. Her voice was strained, tight, with an emotion I couldn't place. She said the freezer was making a loud buzzing noise again. It was the thinnest excuse she had used yet, but the urgency in her voice was real. "Can you come tonight, Elias?" she had asked. "Please." I went. I told myself it was just another call, but I knew it wasn't. When I got to her house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn. All the lights were off except for a single soft lamp in the living room. It made the big house look even more cavernous and empty. She opened the door before I could even ring the bell. She was wearing a simple black dress, something elegant and formal. Her hair and makeup were perfectly done. She looked like she was either going to a funeral or a fancy party. Her eyes were shadowed, her face pale. She didn't smile. "He's not here," she said immediately, her voice flat. "He's at a dinner, for his firm." "Lena, what's wrong?" I asked, stepping inside. The air in the house was cold and still. She didn't answer right away. She just led me into the kitchen. It was dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the large window over the sink. She didn't turn on the light. She walked over to the sliding glass door that led to the back patio and opened it. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of damp earth and dying leaves. "I don't want to be in here," she said. "Let's go outside." We sat on the steps of the wooden deck that overlooked a large, dark backyard. The yard was as meticulously maintained as the house. but in the encroaching darkness, it looked wild and untamed. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. We sat in silence for a long time. I didn't push her to talk. I just sat beside her, a quiet presence in the dark, letting her know she wasn't alone. I could feel her trembling, a slight, continuous shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Finally, she spoke, her voice so low I had to lean in to hear it. "We had a fight this morning. Over breakfast." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "That sounds so normal, doesn't it? A couple having a fight over breakfast." But it wasn't about the coffee, or who left the newspaper a mess. It was about nothing and everything. She took a deep, shuddering breath. He was talking about a new client, a big account he'd landed. He was so pleased with himself. And he looked at me, across the table, and he said, "You should wear that blue dress to the banquet on Saturday. It makes you look presentable. Not beautiful, not nice, presentable. Like I'm an accessory he needs to make sure is polished before he shows it off." She fell silent again, wrapping her arms around herself. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air between us. "I didn't say anything," she continued, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I never do. I just nodded, and he went on talking about his work, about his plans. And I was sitting there, in this beautiful kitchen, in this beautiful house, and I felt like I was suffocating. I felt like I was completely and utterly invisible. Like I could just fade away, and he wouldn't even notice, as long as my chair was still filled at the dinner table." She turned her head to look at me then. In the dim light from the house, I could see the glint of tears on her cheeks. Her expression was raw, stripped of all pretense. It was the most honest, vulnerable face I had ever seen. "And then I thought of you," she whispered. "I thought about you in your truck, with your tools and your quiet hands. You listen. You actually see me. You don't look through me. You don't see an accessory, or a wife, or Jamal's mother. You see me, Lena." My heart ached for her. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to offer some kind of comfort, but I was frozen, unsure of my place in this raw, painful moment. She looked away, staring out into the dark yard. "All these years, I've been pretending to be happy, pretending this life is enough. Pretending I'm not screaming on the inside every single day. I got so good at it I almost believed it myself." She turned back to me, her eyes locking onto mine. Her gaze was intense, desperate. "But then you started coming here, with your calm voice and your steady hands, fixing things that were broken. And you make it hard to pretend." The words landed in the space between us with the weight of a stone. "You make it hard to pretend." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a confession of the highest order. It was an admission that my presence in her life, my simple act of seeing her, had made her own life unbearable. I had held up a mirror to her, and she could no longer ignore the truth of what she saw. "Lena," I started, my voice hoarse, but I had no idea what to say next. What could I possibly say? She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You don't have to say anything, Elias. I needed to say it. I needed someone to know that I'm not just a ghost in this house. That I'm still here." She reached out then, not to touch me, but just holding her hand in the space between us, her palm up, in a gesture of offering or supplication. I met her halfway, my rough, calloused fingers closing gently around hers. Her hand was cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. We sat there, on the cold steps, in the encroaching night, holding hands. It was the most intimate gesture I had ever shared with another person. It was a silent promise, a shared understanding. In that moment, we were no longer the repairman and the housewife. We were just two people, holding on in the dark. We stayed like that for a long time, as the moon rose over the trees, and the silence was no longer empty, but filled with the weight of a truth finally spoken aloud. The weeks that followed that night on the porch were quiet. She didn't call for any more phantom repairs. I didn't push. The confession hung in the air between us, a thing that had changed everything, and nothing at all. I went back to my routine, but it was different now. The quiet of my house felt charged with anticipation. The hum of the machines I worked on sounded like a countdown. I was waiting. We both were, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my garage trying to coax a stubborn lawnmower engine back to life, when a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A man in a tailored suit got out. It was Richard Henderson. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag and stood up, watching him as he walked towards me. He moved with an easy, unearned arrogance, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel of my driveway. He stopped a few feet away from me, looking around my garage with a faint, dismissive curl of his lip. He looked at my old truck, at the stacks of spare parts, at the oil stain on the concrete floor. His gaze was an appraisal, and I was failing it. "You're Elias, right?" he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. His voice was as cold and polished as his shoes. "I am," I said, my own voice steady. I refused to be intimidated by this man in my own space. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My wife has taken a sudden interest in home repair. Our appliances have never been in better shape, or so she tells me." He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the grease stain on my shirt. "You've been to my house. A lot." "I go where the work is," I said simply. "Right. The work." He took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, threatening tone. "Let me give you a piece of friendly advice. My wife, she gets bored. She likes projects. Right now, it seems you're her new project. But projects end. And when this one does, you'll go back to your life, and she'll stay in hers. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He was trying to bait me, to draw me into an argument, to make me defensive. He wanted me to be the hot-headed working-class cliché he already saw me as. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I just held his gaze, my expression unreadable. "I understand that you're a man who is standing in my driveway, making assumptions," I said calmly. His eyes narrowed. My refusal to play his game clearly angered him. "Stay away from my wife," he said, the words sharp and precise, like chips of ice. "Whatever you think is happening, whatever little fantasy you two have cooked up, it's over. I'm a very influential man, Elias. It would be a shame if a small one-man business like yours suddenly found it hard to get parts, or insurance." The threat was clear. He was a man used to getting his way, a man who believed that everything and everyone had a price or a pressure point. He saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be swept aside. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting his threat hang in the air. I let him see that it didn't frighten me. My life was simple. I didn't have much that he could take. My dignity, my sense of self, those weren't things he could touch. He seemed to realize it too. His bravado faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected fear or anger, and my quiet stillness unnerved him. He straightened his tie, a gesture of reasserting his control. "Just remember what I said," he muttered. He turned without another word, got back into his shiny car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, the sound of his engine fading into the afternoon quiet. I wasn't angry, I wasn't scared, I was just sad. Sad for Lena, who had to live with that cold, calculating man. He didn't love her, he owned her. She was a possession, a part of the perfect picture he presented to the world. And he would crush anyone who threatened to smudge that picture. My test had come, and I had passed it. I hadn't risen to his bait. I hadn't called Lena to tell her what happened. I didn't want to put any more pressure on her. This was her fight, her decision. My role was not to be a hero, not to charge in and rescue her. My role was to be the anchor, the steady, quiet presence she could count on, even from a distance. So I waited. I went back to my work, to my routine, and I held her in my thoughts, sending her a silent strength that I hoped, somehow, she could feel. I didn't know what she would do, but I knew, after seeing the man she was married to, that she couldn't stay. She couldn't pretend anymore. A week passed, then 2. The silence from her was absolute. I started to worry. I drove past her street once, on my way to another job, but I didn't stop. The big brick house looked the same as always, impassive and silent. I wondered what was happening behind those perfect windows. I wondered if she was okay. The not knowing was a dull ache in my chest. Then, one Tuesday morning, My phone rang. It was her number. I answered it on the first ring, my heart leaping into my throat. Elias? Her voice was small but clear. Lena, are you all right? Yes, she said, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded like the truth. I am. I'm at the motel on the highway, the Crestview Inn. I was wondering. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you come? I need some help. I'm on my way, I said, no hesitation. I grabbed my keys, didn't even stop to wash my hands. I was out the door and in my truck in less than a minute. The Crestview Inn was a modest, clean place on the outskirts of town. I found her room at the back of the second-floor walkway. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked gently. Come in, she called. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was standard motel fare. 2 double beds, a small table, a television bolted to the dresser. Lena was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked tired, but in a different way than before. This was the exhaustion of a battle fought, not one endured. The deep, weary sadness in her eyes was gone. In its place was a kind of clear, quiet resolve. On one of the beds were 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. I left him, she said simply, turning from the window to face me. Last night, I packed what I could fit in my car and I drove here. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, taking it in. The small pile of her belongings looked so meager, a life condensed into 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. He's not going to make it easy, she said, her voice steady. He's already frozen our joint bank accounts. He called this morning. He was calm. That's the scary part. He told me to enjoy my little tantrum, and that I'd come crawling back when I realized I had nothing. You have more than he thinks, I said quietly. A small smile touched her lips. I know. She walked over to one of the boxes. This is what I needed help with. It's heavy. She gestured for me to look. Inside the box were photo albums and several large, leather-bound portfolios. Her photography. The pieces of her that she had packed away in a closet for years. She had saved herself first. Where do you want it to go? I asked. I found a small apartment, she said, a note of pride in her voice. On the other side of town. It's not much, but it's mine. The landlord is letting me move in this afternoon. I couldn't bear the thought of carrying these things into my new life by myself. I wanted you to be here, and so I helped her move. We loaded the boxes and suitcases into my truck. It didn't take long. As we worked, we talked. She told me about the final days, about the cold silence that had descended on the house after Richard had confronted me. She knew he had come to see me. She said she could see it in his eyes. He had looked at her with a new kind of possessive fury, and in that moment, she knew she had to leave. Not for me, she said, but for herself. Her new apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building that had once been a factory. It had high ceilings, large windows, and wooden floors that creaked. It was small, just a living area, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom. It was completely empty. But as we brought her few belongings inside, the space began to feel less empty. It began to feel like a home, a beginning. We set the boxes in the middle of the living room floor. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The place was filled with light. Thank you, Elias, she said, standing in the center of the room. She looked around at the bare walls and the empty spaces, and she smiled. It was a real smile, wide and full of a light I had never seen in her before. It was the smile of a free woman. You did the hard part, I told her. I couldn't have done it if I hadn't met you, she said, her voice soft. You showed me what it was like to not be invisible. You woke me up. I stayed for a little while longer. We didn't touch. We didn't make any grand declarations. The moment was too fragile, too important for that. It was her moment, her new beginning. I was just a witness, a quiet supporter. When it was time for me to go, I stood at the door, hesitant to leave. I'll call you, she said. It wasn't a question, it was a promise. I know, I said. I walked back to my truck, feeling lighter than I had in years. The future was uncertain. I didn't know what would happen between us. There were divorces to be filed, lives to be rebuilt. It was going to be complicated and messy. But for the first time, I didn't fear the complication. I welcomed it. Because I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that some things are worth the mess. Some things are worth the gray area. A few months passed. Winter settled over the town, blanketing it in snow and a quiet hush. Lena and I kept in touch. We talked on the phone. Sometimes we would meet for coffee at a small diner halfway between her new apartment and my house. The conversations were different now. She was rediscovering herself. She had gotten a part-time job at a local bookstore. She had bought a new camera and was taking pictures again, her eyes newly open to the beauty of the world around her. She was building a life, brick by brick, that was entirely her own. Her divorce was proceeding, slowly and acrimoniously. Richard was, as she had predicted, making it as difficult as possible. But she faced it all with a calm strength that I admired more than I could say. She was no longer the fragile, sad woman I had met in that cold, perfect house. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be. I gave her space. I didn't push for more. I was content to be her friend, her confidant. I was watching her heal, and it was enough. My own life had found a new rhythm. The silence in my house was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. It was a space I could now choose to share. My world had expanded, and the thought of the future, once a vague, gray landscape, was now filled with a quiet, hopeful possibility. One Saturday in early spring, the snow had finally melted, and the air held the first faint promise of warmth. She called me. "I have to go back to the house," she said, "to get the rest of my things. My lawyer finally worked it out. Richard won't be there. He has to be out of the house for a 4-hour window." She paused. "I don't want to go alone." "What time?" I asked. We drove to her old house in my truck. It was strange, pulling into that familiar driveway. The house looked the same, but the feeling was different. It no longer felt menacing. It was just a building, a shell that she had already shed. Inside, it was cold and silent. Dust sheets were draped over some of the furniture. It felt abandoned, a place where life had once been, and was no more. Lena moved through the rooms with a detached efficiency, packing boxes with clothes, books, and personal items she had been forced to leave behind. I was just there to carry the heavy things, a quiet, supportive presence. We were in the master bedroom when she stopped, holding a small, framed photograph. It was a picture of her and a younger Jamal, laughing on a beach. "This is what matters," she said softly, tracing the glass with her finger. "The rest of this, it's just stuff." We loaded the last of the boxes into my truck. As Lena stood on the porch, ready to lock the door for the final time, she paused and looked back into the silent house. I saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes, not for the life she was leaving, but for the years she had lost there. Then she turned the key, a decisive final click echoing in the still air. She took a deep breath, and when she turned to me, her face was clear. She was done. We didn't go back to her apartment. Instead, she asked me to just drive. We ended up at a small park by the river, a place I used to go when I needed to think. We sat on a wooden bench, the weak spring sun on our faces, and watched the water flow by. "It's really over," she said, her voice filled with a sense of wonder. "It is," I confirmed. She turned to me, her expression serious. "Elias, I need to know. What is this? Between us?" I looked at our hands, resting on the bench between us, not touching. I thought about the first day I met her, about the sadness in her eyes. I thought about our coffee talks, about her confession on the porch, about the quiet strength she had shown. "I don't know what to call it," I said honestly. "I just know that when I'm with you, my world feels bigger. It feels better." She smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that seemed to light up the day. "Mine too." She reached out and finally, after all this time, she took my hand, her fingers laced with mine, a comfortable, natural fit. It wasn't a gesture of desperation or need, like that night on the porch. It was a gesture of choice, of beginning. We sat there for a long time, holding hands, not saying anything. The silence between us was no longer about things left unsaid. It was a comfortable, shared, quiet, full of understanding, and the promise of a future waiting to be written. The river flowed on, carrying away the past. I didn't know where we were going, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the journey. I was just grateful to have someone to share the quiet with. This was not an ending. It was the start of the real story, and I was ready for it.